A newly published biography of Benedict XVI hit stores this week with plenty of controversy. Benedict XVI, A Life, was written by best-selling author Peter Seewald. In it, Benedict says the Catholic Church is threatened by a worldwide dictatorship of seemingly humanist ideologies. The Pope Emeritus said, quote, "Modern society is in the process of formulating an anti-Christian creed, and resisting it is punishable by social excommunication. The fear of the spiritual power of the Antichrist is therefore only too natural, and it truly takes the prayers of a whole diocese and the universal church to resist it." He cites same-sex marriage, abortion, and the creation of humans in the laboratory as examples. Seewald says Benedict made the comments in response to a question about his 2005 inauguration, where he asked for the prayers of the faithful that he may, quote, "not flee for fear of the wolves." The Pope Emeritus also addresses his relationship with Pope Francis, claiming their personal friendship has continued to grow over the years. Currently, the book is only available in German. An English version is scheduled for release in November. As the quarantine continues across the United States, the practice of religious faith has been curtailed for weeks. But is it constitutional? Joining me now to discuss her lawsuit against the state of California regarding its ban on public gatherings and its negative effect on religious practice is attorney at the Center for American Liberty, Harmeet Dhillon. Harmeet, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here, Raymond.
Now, you have filed a suit against the governor of California, Governor Newsom, on behalf of California pastors, claiming that the governor's ban on gatherings due to COVID places unconstitutional restrictions on religion. How so?
Well, Raymond, this is one of two suits that we've joined in this regard, all in Southern California. And the issue is that the Constitution and the bucket of rights under the First Amendment protects the right to freedom of worship. And however, there is a Supreme Court case with Justice Scalia authoring the opinion about 30 years ago that puts religion on slightly a lower plane, unfortunately, than some of the other buckets of the First Amendment. But that rule is that the government can get away with burdening religion in the case of a law that is neutral and of general applicability. And so that's what the governor is saying here, is that by banning all gatherings and really most speech in public, he is implementing a law of general applicability. But in real life, what we have here is a number of exceptions, so a number of secular exceptions to this ban on travel and speech and on assembly. And that's what's unconstitutional, Raymond. And there's no end in sight. So given a fundamental right, we are going to the Ninth Circuit seeking an immediate appeal.
Well, now this week, a California federal judge ruled in favor of Governor Newsom, saying that his stay-at-home order did not violate the constitutional rights of free assembly and religion when the Cross Culture Christian Center in Lodi was ordered to cease holding services. Their pastor continued to assemble the congregation. Does that hurt your case?
Well, it is consistent with the rulings that we've already gotten from the other two judges. It is inconsistent with federal judges in other districts. And the first Court of Appeals to rule on this issue in the Sixth Circuit in the Midwest ruled in favor of the people of faith who want to gather. And in my cases, we are seeking to represent people who are willing to gather and pastors who are willing to hold socially distanced services. So we aren't asking for it to be like every day at the church. We are asking that they be allowed to come in with masks, with social distancing in the pews, family units together, but not overcrowded. And the governor still won't allow any exceptions. And so we do think that's unconstitutional. Other courts have agreed with us. So we're going to the Ninth Circuit to seek the Ninth Circuit's intervention here. They may not agree either, but I have a feeling this is going to end up in front of the United States Supreme Court, because this will not be the only emergency in our lifetime, Raymond. As we know, if the government gets away with doing this, they are not fans of religion sometimes. We could see this again and again every year, and that is unacceptable for any person of faith. You know, you and I are both people of faith.
Yeah, let's talk for a second about the restrictions you're seeking here, Harmeet. Now, restrictions can be no greater than the least restrictive possible other public gathering, for instance, at grocery stores or liquor stores or pharmacy. Is that what you're asking? You're just asking for the same restrictions that are being placed on those essential businesses?
Well, that's what we're asking in this case. And so there's a separate legal doctrine that comes into play here. It's the doctrine of what happens in an emergency. So in normal times, I think there would be no question that the government cannot do this. But the competing concept is that in an emergency, there's great deference placed towards the government's actions. However, that deference cannot be unlimited. As Attorney General Barr has said, there is no pandemic exception to the Constitution. And in our nation's history, we have had many emergencies. We have had wars. Even in the Civil War, President Lincoln, made minor changes to and temporary changes to the writ of habeas corpus. And so under these circumstances, I think it is really clear 8 weeks into this pandemic with very few deaths and fewer deaths than in the normal flu season, that this simply exceeds the bounds of what is necessary to achieve the government's compelling interest. But that's the strict scrutiny test. But even under a rational basis test, it is not rational to say that it is important to restrict people of faith in churches, yet now the governor has announced daycares are going to be open. You can stay as long as you want in a Costco with your family. And so I think this is really irrational, and under these circumstances, we're asking the courts to intervene.
Yeah, well, you mentioned there Barr, and he did in multiple interviews, including on Fox and elsewhere, he said that the government could restrict this right for a limited time, for a limited purpose. Are you asking that the governor here, in this case Newsom, or the government at large, define what that limited time period would look like? Is that part of your suit?
Yes, and I've actually, I asked that question in court because we all know that the initial call to action by citizens, from citizens, is 2 weeks to flatten the curve. We heard that all over the country. Then it became a month. Then it became 2 months. When I pressed the Attorney General of California in court on this question, their answer is, well, the duration of this is going to be the duration of the pandemic. And since that time, of course, the governor has said, and many other governors have said, until there's a vaccine or a cure, we are going to have restrictions. That could be years in the future, and that is unacceptable. And what's really going to happen, Raymond, just like with many other aspects of our lives, coloring our hair, cutting our hair, it's going to be driven underground. And so that may not be safe. What we are asking for is a reasonable sort of, we can limit the amount of people in a church at a time, and there can be more services. That would be reasonable. But what's going to happen is the faithful will go underground, just like they do in China, just like they do in Iran, just like they do in other countries that are repressive of people of faith. That may be less safe than simply doing it in a large, semi-empty church or cathedral.
Yeah, Harmeet, I said it weeks ago when this first started. This Chinese virus has turned us all into Chinese worshipers and Chinese people of faith, because we're all going underground. We can't talk about it. Now we're talking about, clocking in when you go into a place of business or you go into a church. You have to register to let them know you've been there and provide your contact information. I mean, I don't know how this regime is acceptable under the American Constitution. Maybe it flies in other countries. But here, I'm not so sure. Have you received any support, incidentally, from Catholic bishops or the Catholic leadership in these cases you filed?
Well, the answer is no, unfortunately, Raymond. And in fact, the governor of California, and I think some other governors, have been very clever in co-opting the Catholic Church and sort of talking to their highest level leaders and saying, don't worry, this is for everybody's safety, and they're falling into line. And so while I have a lot of support from several faiths, other congregations, the Pentecostal folks, and various denominations of the Protestant faith, the Catholic Church has actually banned its line priests from joining any of these efforts. Although I do hear privately from several priests who would like to give confessional to their members, but their leadership will not let them speak out publicly.
Wow. I would have thought they would have at least want to join in the sense of hoping that their services could be considered essential services, essential places of business. That, at the very least, I would have thought. I want to play something for you. Last week, Governor Newsom came out with a plan to begin to reopen California. He had this to say about reopening businesses by this Friday. Listen.
As early as the end of this week, you will have the capacity as a retailer, with the modifications and the guidelines we set forth on Thursday, to begin to reopen for pickup. Clothing, bookstores, music, toys, sporting goods stores, florists, with Mother's Day coming up. We will allow additional movement through phase 2. And so that includes, let me be specific, the prospects of restaurants with modifications opening, hospitality more broadly opening again with modification.
Now, Harmeet, what's interesting there in that reopening plan, along with all the places he mentioned, he has schools listed in phase 2. the reopening of churches aren't listed until phase 3 of that plan. How is that going to fly?
Right. It's outrageous, Raymond. Think about it. You can go into a restaurant and sit a few feet apart or more than average from another diner, but you can't go into your church. It is unconscionable. It's unacceptable. And I can tell you that I will not rest until we have our full access back to our places of worship and many other places. I mean, to be honest with you, I think the governor at this point is just gaslighting the people of California and justifying the extreme shutdowns of the beginning of this. I think if he had told people at the beginning of this, or any governor had, you may not be able to go to church until you get vaccinated and give your name and your contact information, there would have been rioting in the streets at the beginning of this. And there should be rioting in the streets now, I think, safe, socially distanced rioting, of course, I mean to say protest.
Well, we don't have a MERS vaccine.
People need to go to court to do this.
Yeah, we don't have a MERS vaccine. We don't have a SARS vaccine. We don't have an AIDS vaccine, but we never tracked people. I lived in New York in Greenwich Village at the height of the AIDS crisis. I don't remember people being tracked or anybody sheltering in place or saying you can't go to that club or to that restaurant. This is ridiculous. And the idea that you needed a vaccine to go on with your life or to practice your faith, I think we have to safely find ways to accommodate basic rights here. And that's what we're talking about. This is a basic right of religious exercise and religious expression. Do you see this as government overreach? And are you concerned about the precedent that this establishes on both the legislative as well as the judicial level?
Absolutely. And to be clear, the way this is working out as an emergency is the legislature is MIA. They are nowhere to be seen. They're letting the governor do whatever he wants, and they don't want to take responsibility for it, I suspect. But it is their responsibility. The governor is literally making up law on the fly during his daily press conferences. On a whim, he decides that the beaches of Orange County may not be open, but every other beach in California is open. On a whim, he decides, hey, on Tuesday, I'm going to let people go to daycares, but not churches. Where is the science, to quote the young people, where are the receipts to support these positions? The evidence is not there. No court so far has required him to come in and show why you can't have socially distanced protest, socially distanced church services, but really unlimited occupancy of a Costco or some other commercial establishment. And by the way, what good is it to go to a florist when you can't go visit your mom with those flowers on Mother's Day? It's nonsense.
You throw the bouquet at her as you pass. You throw it out the car door. She can get it on the lawn.
By the way,
I guess you have to put it in a baggie.
The governor says you can pick up ballots. You can do ballot harvesting in a special election. You can't go visit your mom unless you're going to pick up her ballot. It's nonsensical.
No, the contradictions here and the hypocrisy are outrageous, and particularly the beach ban, when sunlight and salt water might be the best thing for your immune system on Earth. I mean, it's amazing to me. A unanimous three-judge panel, Harmeet, on the U.S. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals granted an injunction against the enforcement of Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear's orders, and that barred church services at the Maryville Baptist Church and its pastor from holding those services. Now, Maryville Church sued Governor Beshear after the Kentucky State Police descended on the church's Easter Sunday service and posted notices of criminal violation on all the cars in the parking lot. The parishioners were in their cars at this drive-in service. The offenders were subject to mandatory household-wide quarantine just for attending a church service outside, for driving up. The Court of Appeals openly questioned the governor's favored treatment of countless businesses. Here's what he said: assuming all of the same precautions are taken, why is it safe to wait in a car for a liquor store to open, but dangerous to wait in a car to hear morning prayers? Why can someone safely walk down a grocery store aisle, but not a pew? And why can someone safely interact with a brave delivery woman, but not a stoic minister? The Commonwealth has no good answers. While the law may take periodic naps during a pandemic, we will not let it sleep through one. Isn't this what you've been saying all along? We're seeing complacency when it comes to this issue of religious freedoms during a pandemic.
Well, I'm in the Ninth Circuit, unfortunately, not the Sixth Circuit, but thanks to our president, we have a much better Ninth Circuit. If I had the same panel in the Sixth Circuit with my two cases, I would win. It's exactly the same issue. Now, the governor, in response to my first lawsuit, did allow drive-in services, but he did it in a sort of, passing reference in his opposition brief. He still hasn't updated the guidelines. And as a result, throughout California. Most counties have not either. And in fact, in Santa Clara County, churches are being threatened if they hold drive-in services. You can drive to the liquor store or the marijuana store or the laundromat, but not the church. This is outrageous. It's unacceptable. And people of faith, of all faiths in America, actually, need to rise up. And frankly, I'd like to see more action from our United States Attorney General on this. Writing letters of support is not sufficient. We need intervention by the U.S. attorneys, and we need government action on this.
Yeah. Final question, Harmeet. Just think through this with me. Why do you think the churches, particularly some of the major denominations, are so reluctant to engage this question of we are essential services? We should be given the same rights as a Costco or a Walgreens. Is it fear that the government won't bail out their church-affiliated schools or hospitals in the wake of this pandemic?
I don't think it's even that sophisticated, Raymond. I think it comes from a more innate, in the part of at least some religious leaders, fear of the government and inferiority complex. There have been certainly times in many histories and many countries where churches and people of faith have been persecuted, and they'd really like to either lay low or, be among the popular kids. And so if the governor happens to call up, the Archbishop in California and say, Archbishop, here's the plan. Can you maintain the peace? And the guy falls into line because maybe he wants to be popular with the governor. I don't know. I wasn't party of that conversation, but that is what I suspect. But, some faith leaders are not having it, and some faithful are not having it. By the way, all of these churches and synagogues, temples, gurdwaras, mosques, they're all going to go under financially. They depend on the contributions of their supporters who come to, and that's a very bad, and that's already happening. We are already seeing churches, I believe, in your area, and dioceses declaring bankruptcy. That is going to be a permanent ratchet down of access to faith and comfort, which we need more than ever during this difficult time.
I agree. Well, as a pastor friend told me many, many weeks ago, spiritual communions lead to spiritual donations, and you can't cash those. You got to keep the doors open and pay the bills. So that nuts and bolts conversation has to be had in the faith community. Finally, Governor Pritzker of Illinois stated today that churches may not have more than 50 people at services until there's a vaccine. Is that warranted? I mean, they don't say only 50 people can go, down to the Sam's Club.
It isn't. I think what would be a facially neutral rule would be to say in any indoor establishment of any type, people be 6 feet or 10 feet or whatever it is apart, and a neutral rule. Absent that, I mean, as we know, Raymond, in the National Cathedral in Washington, having 50 people is very different than in the 200-year-old local town church. So there needs to be a rule of neutral applicability, and that would be upheld by the courts.
Harmeet Dhillon, thank you so much for your insight, for your time. We'll check back in with you.
Thank you, Raymond.